Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. This is your host, the Barkeep, bringing you podcast 49 here at the tavern, presented by Hirotaku.com. Well, as many of you all are not aware, I am currently married, and I am married to a very beautiful, very lovely Korean woman. And you know, the thing about learning other people's cultures by living with them is not only does it drive you mad, but you do learn some interesting things along the way. And of course, my wife has taught me a lot of things, and of course, I have taught her a lot of things. And what I had imagined was that when she first found out that I was really into Power Rangers and Super Sentai, that I would have to really explain everything about the series. And for the most part, I pretty much have to. But my wife has actually already seen Power Rangers when she was growing up in Korea. Because it turns out that in Korea, they actually dubbed Mighty Morphin Power Rangers all the way up to Power Rangers Wild Force in Korean. So about the same time that I was watching Power Rangers and growing up on it, Koreans were doing the same thing. Got a bunch of Korean kids who were watching Tommy and Jason, except they weren't speaking English, they were speaking Korean. And it's just an interesting prospect to me that you have a Japanese television show dubbed or translated into English for American audiences, and then dubbed into Korean for Korean audiences. So it's just an interesting exercise, and thanks to my wife and a little research by Lavander Ranger as well, I was really able to track this series and figure out, what's the history of Power Rangers in Korea, which is the topic we're kind of going to be talking about today. Not the entire history, but I want to focus on something very specific, and I'm going to get to that here in a second. But what's interesting is after Wild Force, they didn't have Power Rangers for a good long time. Most likely it would have something to do with the distribution rights since Disney went ahead and bought up the series around the time of Wild Force. But in 2004, Power Rangers returned to Korea. But what they decided to do this time is they actually took the Sentai footage and dubbed it directly into Korean. So what they got is, in 2004, they got Abra Ranger, but they didn't call it Abra Ranger. They actually called it Power Rangers Dino Thunder. It didn't have Tommy, didn't have Connor, didn't have Mesogog, anything like that. It is a straight-up translation of Abra Ranger into Korean, but called Power Rangers Dino Thunder. And I assume the reason they did this was simply because, hey, everybody is familiar with what Power Rangers is, even though we're bringing it back after 4 years, we're going to call it Power Rangers because that's what people are familiar with. And that's the thing, that I talked to my wife about. Apparently, there's no actual translation for Power Rangers in Korea. You simply call it Power Rangers, which is also odd, but anything language is perplexing to me. But let's get into the meat of this. So in 2004, they had Power Rangers Dino Thunder, followed by Power Rangers Special Police Delta, the Magic Force, Treasure Force, Wild Spirits, Engine Force, and Jungle Force. Now let's go ahead and stop right there at Jungle Force. Now, as I said previously, they actually dubbed everything up to Wild Force into Korean. But when it came time to do a Shinkanger adaptation, whoever's producing over in Korea decided to skip it and go back and do a Power Ranger adaptation. So basically what Korea has is they have Wild Force, Korean adaptation of the American adaptation of Japanese, and Jungle Force, which is a Korean adaptation of the direct Japanese source, which I just find hilarious. I find it so interesting that they have two dubs of essentially the same show. Because for the most part, a lot of the Wild Force plots did coincide with what was going on in Power Ranger, with a couple of exceptions here and there. But the question arises, why did they go ahead and skip Shinkanger? Well, as my wife is so fond of telling me, the Koreans are not very fond of the Japanese. Now, this is something that goes, as recent as the Second World War, but is something that goes back even further, because throughout Japanese history, the Japanese were pretty much trying to go ahead and conquer the Koreans at just about every point within their history, with the exception of their isolation and so forth. But in any case, there is a long history of animosity between both the Koreans and the Japanese. And it would seem that the reason that they did not go ahead and adapt Shinkenger is because it had too much of a Japanese influence. Which I say, no duh, because they have kanji, they are samurai, which are exclusively Japanese. So they decide not to go ahead and adapt it whatsoever. I find that bit of an odd choice, and I'll get into, kind of my bigger thoughts on the picture here. But yeah, they just went ahead and skipped it because they didn't want these Japanese influences. So be it. Well, then later on, they decided to go on and do Miracle Force. And then after that, they did Power Rangers Captain Force. And of course, that is the translation of Gokaiger. Now, the weird thing about that is that they did not actually edit any of the episodes to any of my knowledge. So basically, they have all 51 episodes of Gokaiger translated into Korean, which also means that they have Shinkenger in there. And in Japan, I know for in Korea, I know for a fact that they released the Gao Lion. I know that much because I have it. My sister-in-law in Korea bought it for me. And why I find this interesting is they wanted to avoid the whole Shinkenger thing and avoid the Japanese influences. Yet, they decide to adapt Gokaiger, which uses Shinkenger a lot and has Shinkenger mecha, or was essentially a Shinkenger-powered mecha in the Gao Lion. So I don't understand what the Korean logic is here. So they want to go ahead and avoid Japanese influences. Okay, let's say that that's exactly what they want to do, and of course they're right in doing that. Then why do you go and adapt a series that has Shinkenger in it and present them in the episodes? Because, there's a lot of episodes where they are prominently transformed into Shinkengers. And actually, I've even seen commercials for the toys in which they transform into the Shinkenger and have the Shinkano. Or, excuse me, the Gokai Shinkano. I'm trying to remember the exact name of that. So, for all they were trying to do to avoid it, they eventually show up anyway. But here's another thing, too. They're actually called Power Rangers Blade Force. So it doesn't have anything to do with Samurai at that point. They're just Power Rangers Blade Force. So much to the fact that the Ranger key set, which is most likely what you're looking at on your screen right now, on the back of it, it's not Shinken Pink or Shinken Green or anything. It's Blade Pink, Blade Green, Blade Red, Blade Blue, and Blade Yellow, and eventually Blade Gold. And I just find that hilarious that they are so much into avoiding the Japanese thing that they completely gave them a name that doesn't really fit, because, again, they're Blade Force, but they use other weapons than swords, and, of course, they're samurai using swords. Now, this brings me to another interesting thing. My wife was actually able to find me an article which is in Korean. I have that article posted up in the comments section. I apologize if nobody in my fan base can actually read Korean. But if you actually do read it, it points out that Kamen Rider was also adapted in Korea. And they did adapt Kamen Rider Decade. And they adapted the episodes where the Shinkengers guest star in the Kamen Rider episodes. And here's something interesting. In those episodes, they're known as Power Rangers Samurai Force. Interesting, is it not? So you have trying to avoid the samurai Japanese references altogether, and then you have them going into Captain Force, knowing full well that the Shinkengers make prominent appearances. They have characters from Shinkenger to show up in cameo appearances. They have a mecha that's Japanese influenced. And then you have another show altogether which has them as known as Samurai Rangers or Samurai Force. So the whole thing is very confusing. And the question I have to ask of this is why. Because what they're doing is so counter to what they're saying. I guess it's in a way hypocritical. Because here's another fact I want to go ahead and bring up. When they actually do the episodes of Gokaiger, or Captain Force, they do the ending where they name all the previous Sentai teams in that little rap at the end. Despite the fact that prior to Zoo Ranger, they don't have any shows made off that, no real footage to go ahead and use, but they name them anyway. And of course, they come up with names for them. So you got the Go Ranger was the 5 Ranger, and Power Rangers Flashman, Power Rangers Jetman, and so forth, and all that. And they actually do have translations for Hurricaneger and Kaku Ranger. And they call Power Rangers Ninja Storm, which is normal. And then I believe the Kaku Ranger adaptation is named Power Rangers Ninja Rangers. Okay, let's stop there for a second. So they don't want the Japanese influence from a samurai show, but they're okay with the Japanese influence from ninja-based shows, which, to my knowledge as well, is also a Japanese thing. I actually had a conversation last night with Raptor about this, and he says that ninjas are so neutral that they could be just from anywhere, that they're not necessarily from Japan. And while I agree with him on that point, it is still something that originated in Japan. That's why you have the Ninja Turtles. Hamato Yoshi is from Japan. He's not from China. He's not from Vietnam. He's not from Korea. He's not from anywhere else. He's from Japan. Their villain, Orokusaki, he is from Japan as well. The Ninja Turtles have their roots and their origins based in Japan. So, again, we're trying to avoid Japanese references, but they willingly went into a show in which they would have to make several Japanese references over and over and over again. Not to mention, let's point out that once they started in 2004 with Power Ranger, they are Japanese actors. And, I haven't seen any episodes of the Power Rangers Wild Spirits or the Engine Force, but I do know there's a couple of episodes where they actually go to Shinto shrines and they pray. Geki Ranger has a lot of Chinese mythology built into it, but I do know that they have gone to a couple of shrines there, that they do pray for the new year, and a lot of Japanese cultural traditions. Even in the Christmas episodes, they are treated in a Japanese way, because according to my wife, in Korea they celebrate Christmas just like we do over here as a religious holiday, but in Japan it's celebrated more as a secular holiday, more of a lover's holiday. And of course that is played off in the relationship of Ryo and Melee in Geki Ranger, and I would assume has to be kept in for Wild Spirits, because again, it does not appear that they've edited anything out, that they've taken episodes out of any of these shows from what my research has concluded. However, I will mention that most of my stuff is in Korean, and trying to get my wife to translate appropriately for me has been a little bit difficult. Nevertheless, I just find it odd that that's what they're doing, and I can't really explain it. Because again, if you're trying to avoid it, why are you actively avoiding in some cases, but in other cases not avoiding it? Because it would seem to me that if they want to avoid any Japanese cultural references, they would do two things. One, they would have done Power Ranger adaptations once again, because that's an all-white cast. Well, for the most part, but it's an American cast. Let me go ahead and put it that way. And there's no connection to Japan in 99% of Power Rangers series. Even in Samurai, there's no connection to Japan, but that's a debate for another time. But if they couldn't get the distribution rights, then I could understand that. It was probably easier just to get the straight up Sentai distribution rights. And the second thing I would go ahead and say is, why didn't they just go ahead and skip Captain Force? Because again, when you have all these references to Shinkanger, Kaku Ranger, and Hurricaneger, you're just you skipped it for whatever reason. Now, maybe it was because there was a change in the production staff and they decided not to go ahead and do it. But that would also make me wonder, why didn't they go back and redub Shinkanger? Because if it's okay to have the Shinkanger in the Korean version of Captain Force, then why not have a whole series based on Shinkanger? And again, yes, I know that there's animosity between the two peoples, but the last time that the Koreans and the Japanese had sustained conflict was at the Second World War. It would be as if us in America did not want to go ahead and air a German television show because of our conflicts with them in the war. I mean, it just, to me, and I know this is not going to be true of my wife, but to me, it just seems that they should have gotten over that by now. And I have gone through a couple of classes where I've seen videos about what they did to the Koreans and the hardships and all those problems and stuff. But as everybody likes to point out, it's a kid show. So why is that logic not applied to Shinkanger for its Blade Force or Samurai Force counterpart? Are they really upset that parents are going to see their kids enjoying samurai characters and that they will like the Japanese or be interested in Japanese culture? Now, to be honest, I'm interested in Japanese culture since I found out about Sentai, and of course I'm pursuing my minor in Japanese studies. Do they feel that something similar will happen with their children and that they would want to go ahead and pursue that? I mean, is that really a danger in Korea? I don't necessarily think so. But this raises so many questions to which I don't really know where to begin, because again, I don't know much about Korean television. Of course, my wife doesn't tell me much other than that, she could tell me about a couple of shows. And I've seen a couple of Korean shows, mostly dramas and comedies and all that, basically their equivalent to the CBS lineup and whatnot. But I also wonder why the Korea just doesn't come up with their own adaptation. Because, I don't know what exactly the Korean film industry or television industry is like, but I imagine that if we could make Power Rangers out of the Japanese footage, that they could do the same. Because, again, I don't understand. You have Japanese actors playing or voiced by Koreans in the dub, and yet you don't want to acknowledge anything Japanese. So this seems like a very complicated issue, that there seems to be a lot of different facets to this, and I guess you would have to know more about what the production's thinking. We would have to get information from them, but much like Power Rangers information, that information is kind of scarce. I've had my wife look for it before. She really can't seem to find anything to substantiate much, to be honest. But I want to go ahead and just kind of bring this out, to you guys in the comments. What do you guys think? Do you have a better understanding of what's going on in Korea than I do? Do you think it was right for them to skip Shinkanger? And do you think it was right for them to even have Captain Force with Shinkanger in it if they completely skipped it? Now, of course, we can bring up that argument within the shows, like, why did you have Go Ranger in there if nobody in Korea knows what the heck a Go Ranger is? But that's a little bit different than completely ignoring a series just because you don't like the Japanese influences that it might bring over. So, and again, I just don't get the whole thing. It's very confusing to me, and I would definitely like to get some sort of explanation on it from someone. But I definitely want your all's comments. What do you think? How do you kind of feel about this? And if you're Korean, I definitely would like to hear your opinions on it, whether you're Korean or Korean American or whatever. Have you seen these adaptations? Do they actually edit stuff out? Do they downplay the Japanese stuff? That's what I'd like to go ahead and know. But I want to thank you guys for listening to me here today. Again, I will have a link to both the Korean article, and I'll have a link to Lavender Ranger's page so that you can go ahead and see kind of what he wrote about the different seasons that they had. And of course, it looks like that starting this year, they're going to have Power Rangers Go Buster in Korea, which in itself is interesting as well. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for listening. Have a good day. And the tavern is now closed.